This is the Monday Dhamma Friends Discord Hangout, and a couple of questions have come up. The first was about having a desire to be in the present moment. I think it was Edward asked if it's better to have a strong desire to be present, and he said that in his experience, he feels like he's more present when he has a strong desire to be present. And then Santiago asked a question as well, which is, if you have a mind that is unmoved by happiness and sorrow, we could add the other. That's 2 of the 8 worldly winds you mentioned. So if the mind is unmoved by happiness and sorrow, or any of the other 6 worldly winds, let's say praise and blame, fame and disrepute, and then what's the other one? Gain and loss. If you have a mind that's completely unmoved by these things, although Santiago's question was specifically about happiness and sorrow, then what is that state like? What's a state that is unmovable by these feelings of happiness and sadness? What is that like? So that's an interesting question as well. So I'll start with Edward's question, which is a strong desire to be in the present moment. My intuitive response to that, being sort of a long time involved with Dhamma, is that it's a bit of a contradiction in terms. I don't doubt that when you say that you feel more present when you have a strong desire to be present, that works. So maybe there's something that I can clarify in my mind while I'm thinking out loud here, but my intuitive response would be that if you look at the Buddha's teaching on dependent origination, or if you follow the gradual training, which starts with traditionally sense restraint, I like to say that what we do here is sense restraint. When we choose to be satisfied, we are restraining the mind from chasing after the pleasures and running away from the displeasures that are associated with the senses. When normally we're wanting to be stimulated in a positive way, wanting to get rid of being stimulated in a negative way. And that desire is deluding us into seeing things as permanent, seeing things as pleasing, seeing things as satisfying and whatnot. And here we practice being satisfied with things exactly as they are, not as permission to chase every desire we have, but as permission to let those desires go and just be happy with it, with or without whatever is present in our experience. So that connects pretty directly to Edward's question. To make the mind fully present, gathered together, unified in this moment, in this reality, it needs to be without desire. It needs to be desireless. There's different ways of talking about how the mind is divided. I could talk about it in technical ways, but I'm going to use sort of Dhammarato's framework for this, at least how I like to understand it. Pretty much every moment of our life, where the mind is divided into several different pieces, and the Buddha talks about wild animals pulling the mind in different direction. But the way that Dhammarato talks about it in modern terms is that we're pretty much always being pulled in one direction by what we want. Or let's say there's a relationship, a toxic, high conflict relationship between what we want, what we think should be, and the way things actually are. And every once in a while in life, by some magic, those 3 things might come together, right? What you want, the way you think things should be, and the way things actually are might come together, and your desire will come to extinction right there. And you'll experience the bliss of desirelessness that the Buddha is talking about, what we call satisfaction. But 99.999% of the time, what we want, what we think, the way we think things should be, and the way things actually are not in alignment, right? So let's say, simple example is we want to make our bodies fit and beautiful by conventional standards, because that's it's self-perception. But let's say we want to make our bodies conventionally lean and fit or whatever. Um, and we really want to eat lots and lots of pasta at 9 o'clock at night. I don't know. And we think that if we want to be fit, then we shouldn't be eating that pasta. I don't know. Let's see. This is just the best example I can come up with right now. So, our desire to be, or the thought that we should be fit and healthy, or the desire to be fit and healthy is conflicting with the desire to eat the pasta. We think either we should eat the pasta or we shouldn't eat the pasta. We want to be fit or we don't want to be fit. They're just kind of pulling against each other, right? And then, but the way things actually are is that, there's just this body, and then there's food, and we can take the Buddha's advice and give the body just enough food in order to support the spiritual life, is what he says. We shouldn't think of food as pleasurable or unpleasurable, or we can enjoy the taste of it. We shouldn't think of it as for the purpose of making the body beautiful. We shouldn't think of it. I'm using shoulds here, but in this context, I think it's okay. That we should just see food and as energy to support the spiritual life. So the reality is that this body needs to eat, and we need to feed it, and we don't need to overfeed it and make it feel uncomfortable. We don't need to add all the emotional proliferation, whatnot. So that's just one example of wants and shoulds and reality coming against each other. And what creates that division is desire, right? So there's different orders you can look at the relationship of the kilesas. What's called the kilesas. They're the three sort of expressions of craving: greed, hatred, and delusion. Sometimes they're articulated as Mara's daughters, right? So Mara rules the realm of sensuality, which is the realm of desire in regard to the senses. And Mara's daughters are greed, hatred, and delusion. Moha are lobha, dosa, and moha. And so there's different ways we can think about how these kilesa work with each other. Oftentimes we think of delusion as most primary, and greed and hatred sort of being a result of delusion. But there's one way I've been thinking about the past couple of days, which is that desire is really the root, right? So, the Buddha teaches us that all conditioned things are unsatisfying, or they're impermanent, they're unsatisfying, and they are unownable. They're not me or mine. But when we want something, we see things that are not permanent as permanent. We see things that are not satisfying as satisfying, and we see things that are not me and mine as me and mine. So that's all delusion, right? That's seeing the opposite of the three characteristics, seeing things that are impermanent as permanent, seeing things that are unsatisfying as satisfying, seeing things that are not me and mine as me and mine. That's all delusion. But it's our desire for an object that deludes us into seeing them as permanent, satisfying, and ownable, right? Or controllable or possessible. And and then of course, anything that comes into conflict with that desired object results in a feeling of hatred, right? So the example here might be like, let's say you were a teenager, or you're a parent with a teenage son or daughter, and that son or daughter has a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, some partner that they desire, and they think that this person is like perfect and beautiful, the love of their life. The love is going to be everlasting. There's never going to be any problems. It's always going to be perfect and beautiful. And but you can, from your experience, there's exceptions to this, that these things tend to be impermanent. They tend to be changeful. They tend to be unsatisfying. The desire itself changes. The people change. Everything changes. And even the sense of desire that people have towards each other is what creates the sense of ownership, right? So it might start out beautiful in the beginning, but then people tend to want to possess each other, then that creates more toxicity. So you can see how like desire is sort of the forerunner of like the seeing permanence, seeing satisfactoriness, and seeing ownability in objects of the senses. So this is how the mind gets conditioned throughout our lives to constantly fool itself into thinking that this next thing, this next person, this next experience is going to be the thing that makes me happy. So this is our perpetual state of dissatisfaction. We're in this cycle of dissatisfaction driven by, greed, hatred, and delusion, these three forms of desire. So that we can't really be present when desire is present necessarily. For that reason, it's what creates past, it's what creates future, it's what creates good and bad, it's what creates beautiful and ugly, it's what creates the sense of me that's implicated by praise and blame. It's what creates the sense of deluded happiness that we think we're going to get from gain, that we lament from loss. It's what creates all of our vulnerability, our liability to these 8 worldly winds that the Buddha talks about. It's what creates this whole massive suffering, essentially. And before I get to conclude on this point here, the sort of the technical, the sort of direct perception, you can say, of dependent origination, if you look at it directly in experience, the Buddha tells us that these experience is constituted by these 5 domains he calls the khandhas, the domain of the body, of physicality, of solidity, cohesion, movement, and heat, or temperature, is another way it's broken down. That's the domain of physicality, the rupa khandha. Then there's the domain of vedana khandha, which is the tone of feeling that arises at the sense doors, that's felt as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That goes for what we see, hear, taste, touch, and feel. There's the domain of perception, the domain of thinking, and the domain of consciousness. And this is what constitutes our experience. And this is all just nature, essentially. This is just a way of breaking down nature. Although the Buddha doesn't make any assumption outside of experience. He doesn't make a claim that this nature is objectively physical. He doesn't make any claims that this nature is objectively mental. He doesn't make any claims of any metaphysical assumption beyond experience itself. These 5 domains of experience, these khandhas, these are just the way we experience in the world. This is, he calls it the all. He calls it the world. He calls it the cosmos. This is all we can know. There's nothing outside of it. These domains of experience. And these are fine. These are empty of self, empty of meaning or value, not in a negative or depressing way, just in a factual way. And what makes these domains of experience suffering is in the unfolding of dependent origination is the arising of tanha, which is that ignorant craving. And the actual experience of tanha is clinically what we call emotion in modern terms. Not emotion in the broader sense that we normally use the word emotion. That includes a broader spectrum of feeling, but this very sort of unconscious evolutionary programming of drives arising in order to pressure us towards certain things and pull us away from other things. And when emotion arises in response to the 5 khandhas, it creates that feeling of possession. And that feeling of possession is what then creates the sense of me. That's the bhava, the sense of existence. And then that bhava is expressed in action, and that's what's referred to as birth in Buddhism. And as soon as that happens, that's when we experience, that's when this self that is born looks to the khandhas for what if there is this feeling of me, what am I? And the one thing that is taking presence in the perception of space and time is the physical body. So it takes the physical body up as me and mine. And as soon as the physical body is assumed as me and mine, time is born, right? So there's a past, which is birth. There's a future, which is death, and the present, which is aging. So we have a past when we were born, we have a future when we'll die, and we have a present, which is aging. So this is how the possession of the khandhas, the upadana khandhas, he calls it, give forth to this whole massive suffering. And it's all rooted in desire, essentially. So desire is really, really the thing to be aware of at all times. Whenever there's suffering, you have to say, what is it that I'm wanting? Or you can just remind yourself that there's nothing to want, right? everything is okay exactly as it is. There are some things I have influence over, but for the most part, this is just a perfectly harmonious process of nature unfolding on its own. There's nothing I need to do. It's not incomplete. It doesn't need, there's nothing missing except the realization that nothing is missing, right? That's one way I like to articulate the third noble truth, the realization that nothing is missing, the bliss of being without, being okay, being without. So anyway, I'm not going to go on and on about that too much longer, but just to summarize my response to Edward's question is that what you might be experiencing when you feel more present, desiring the present, is this little mental hack that I think Dhammarato has expressed, which is he once said, wanting things we don't have is painful, so we need to stop wanting. And then he said, or better yet, more wisely, he said, we can want things that are freely available. So we've spent our entire lives identified with desire. We are desire itself. So we can sort of just use that to bring us to the present moment. We can want what's not the present moment, right? Because that's a concept in our mind, but like something actual in the present moment, like this next breath, right? We can say, I want this breath right now. And to be fully satisfied with this breath, or I want to be sitting in this chair talking to my friends on Discord right now. So then my desire is already satisfied the moment it's born. I like to think of it as like when they use a backburn in a wildfire situation, they'll light another fire, and then when the two fires come together, they extinguish each other. So desire is a fire, and then the desire for what's freely available right now is the backburn, and then they come together and extinguish. So that might be maybe what you're experiencing, Edward, when you desire this present moment, as long as this present moment is actual, not conceptual. And before I go on to the other question, I just want to invite anybody else to add to that topic or ask a connected question or whatever you want to do.
I'm okay. So I'm trying to figure out. It seems like you want to just not take too many steps and just go straight from dukkha to just being satisfied. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good. It's definitely something I need to actually practice more. But I think I've been doing things in like steps. Like I'll have a strong desire to be present, and then that way I will find a way to be present by letting go of seeing things differently. So I'll just see things the way they are, and then I'll experience sort of satisfaction. So it's sort of like it seems like more steps than you're explaining, but I don't know if you see that as like a method that could work, or if you think that it's better to just go straight from sort of seeing the desire to be present, but then just going straight to, oh yeah, well everything's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So like even if you aren't present enough to see everything's okay, just like believing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like because I sort of see a difference between fully believing something and actually being aware of what's going on and then really deep down knowing it. So
Yeah.
like if you actually have the desire to really look and know it for yourself, then I feel like it's has a stronger effect than just going straight to like, oh yeah, I think everything's okay. I know
Mm-hmm.
it's okay because in the past I knew it was okay. So now it's obviously okay, even though I'm not actually
Mm-hmm.
really paying attention.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. There is a way that this phrase "everything is okay" can be sort of a diluted thought, but um, Dhammarato is really good at navigating people's psychology into seeing the truth of that. So that's not my skill. So I'm not really gonna try to convince people of that. But what I can say is that it's a matter of sort of undoing the tangled narratives that you've been living in your whole life that have been convincing you things aren't okay. And this is just a way of speaking about the same Dhamma that the Buddha taught, right? I mean, greed, hatred, and delusion, lobha, dosa, moha, they're like little Rumpelstiltskins spinning yarns all the time. They're creating narratives in the mind, and each of these storylines have their own characters, and each of these characters are different selves that we are, and these selves are born to live out the pursuit of different desires that are part of these narratives, right? So this is what existence is. There are these storylines. Carl Jung talked about this in similar ways. He called the ego a complex. It's within the broader consciousness. He used the capital S self, of course, but he talked about the mind as being very, very broad, much broader and bigger than what we normally identify with in our thinking. And in a similar way that is experienced in the Dhamma. But these complexes that he talked about are similar to what is called self in Buddhism. I like to think of them as narratives. So the point I'm making here in response to what you're saying is that we have narratives of dissatisfaction. Dhammarato says it simply. He says we've been talking ourselves into feeling bad our whole lives, so now we're going to talk ourselves into feeling good. That's the wholesome thoughts, right? We've been having unwholesome thoughts of dissatisfaction are unwholesome thoughts about the past, thoughts about the future, thoughts about what we want to be different, what we don't want, thoughts about the way things should be instead of the way things are. Those are all examples of unwholesome thoughts. These are all thoughts of dissatisfaction. These are all thoughts that keep us out of harmony with the way things are, off balanced, always falling back to the past or leaning towards the future, or feeling sort of dizzy about what is right now, feeling very unclear and muddy about the present moment. And these are all, emotionally charged, meaning laden, value laden, opinion laden stories that are going on in our minds. That's why the Buddha says, go to an empty hut, go to the root of a tree, seek solitude, essentially, get away from all of these contexts for different selves that we are to arise, right? And I used the example of solitary confinement once. I'm not going to go there, but the reason that let's say Bodhidharma brought the practice of wall gazing to China is because when you're in a cave staring at a wall, there's nothing there but these narratives that we live in and as to fuel themselves, right? The upadanas that are fuels. So you have to untangle these narratives that tell you all the reasons why it's not okay to just be okay with the way things are right now. And so if you're just sort of adding a little counter narrative to that whole mess of stories telling you things are okay, and it's like all the things I should be doing, all the things I want to be doing, all the reasons why I'm not okay, thousands and thousands of storylines going on, and then you're just told, just think things are okay exactly as they are. You just have this little tiny, one wholesome thought being thrown into the mix of all those others. It's going to be overwhelmed. Essentially, it's like sending a happy ninja into a crowd of angry samurai. I don't know. And and the way Dhammarato teaches is like, okay, you just keep cultivating wholesome thoughts, until the mind is so filled with wholesome thoughts that it overwhelms all of that, all of those patterns of negativity you developed your whole lives. And he uses the example of, even if your mind is a sewer, if you put, if you think of a wholesome thought as like a hamburger and you keep layering it on top of the sewer, instead of cleaning out the sewer, let's say, eventually you're going to have a stack of hamburgers so high that like the top 10 feet are all edible, even if the bottom is still in the sewer. But the other way to go about it is the more, I guess, traditional way to go about it. Well, I mean, it's that is the traditional way to go about it, because that's noble right effort, right? But that's in combination with removing the fuels. So you want to abandon all the unwholesome stuff. This is the noble right effort. Abandon unwholesome thoughts. Prevent the re-arising of unwholesome thoughts. So that's the first and second noble right effort. Cultivate wholesome thoughts, and then sustain those cultivated wholesome thoughts. So you're basically reprogramming the mind. And that's done in the context of sense restraint, in the traditional sense of detoxing the mind from its addiction to, doing things based off of desire. As long as you are doing things to get things or doing things to feel better than you do, you're fueling the agent of the matrix, as like the architect of the matrix, desire, right? You're fueling it. Even when you're doing things or getting things to make you feel better than you do in a seemingly wholesome way, you're still fueling the habit of not being okay with the way things are, and seeking things outside of the mind itself in order to be satisfied. I mentioned last time, I think, Ajahn Mun's articulation of the Four Noble Truths was the mind going outside of itself is suffering, and the mind going outside of itself is the cause of suffering. The mind having gone outside of itself is suffering. The mind staying within itself is the end of suffering, and the mind remaining within the mind is, the way leading to the end of suffering. So what Ajahn Mun is expressing is that the mind, first of all, what we normally think of when I say the mind is not the mind, right? We have taken thoughts, perceptions, things like that to be what the mind is, but these are just activities of the mind. It's not the mind itself, right? We've taken the kilesa to be the mind, greed, hatred, delusion. We've taken the body to be the self, which is just a mental image that the mind constructs. But the mind is sort of the totality of experience, is the best way I can put it at the moment. And it fragments itself because it's constantly seeking something outside of itself, because it can't really see itself, right? The mind can't see itself. And actually, the mind coming to know itself is part of that change of lineage that's talked about in the suttas. They call it the chitta nimitta, seeing the sign of the mind. You begin to discern where sort of the mind's own nature is distinct from the things that it creates, essentially. But when we tell ourselves that the purpose of saying everything is okay exactly as it is not to create a delusion within a bunch of other delusions. It's to take a fire extinguisher to the fire of the craving that's in the form of things are not okay. I'll be okay when I get the job I want. I'll be okay when I get the car that I want. I'll be okay when I get rid of this thing that I don't like. These are all just, fires and stories that are inside the mind. And when we say everything is okay exactly as it is, at least, in this sangha here, what we're trying to do is undermine that whole process, invite the mind back to rest within itself, and just to be at rest, essentially. Really, what the Dhamma is about is about healing, right? Buddhadasa used to talk about the kilesa as things that stab, right? Greed, hatred, and delusion are like little needles that we've been stabbing the mind with, or that have been stabbing the mind, for eons, endless expansions and contractions of the universe. Or we can just think of as far back as we can remember, beginningless time, we've been stabbing the mind with dissatisfaction. Just it's painful when you think about it. When you think back on whatever age you are now, I'll use my age, 37 years old. 37 years, how much of that time has been spent not satisfied? How much of that time has been spent dissatisfied, judging, wanting, hating, irritated, missing things, not taking in the fullness of experience because the mind is blurry with thoughts, or trying to get to something else, trying to get away from something, stuck in, imagination, whatever. How long have we been thinking, saying, and doing things that are just injuring the mind, right? Just it, and then doing other things to cover up the pain that we cause ourselves from this diluted mess of constantly wanting things we don't have, constantly being dissatisfied with the way things are. And the Dhamma is just telling us to just stop all of that so that we can just let the mind rest. The kilesa are still going to be in there. Greed, hatred, and delusion are still going to be in there, running around, telling us what to do. They're like, know exactly what to say to us to make us fall into their narratives. And but if we can stop and just sort of be okay with the habits of bad feelings that'll continue to come up to pressure us to go and do things, right? So to entertain ourselves, to distract ourselves, to get away from the way we feel. That's just continually to that's a continued self abuse. You can think of it as. So the analogy that's pretty common is you could think of the mind as being like an open wound, and it itches, and we're scratching it and scratching it and scratching it. We're scratching it with greed. We're scratching it with hatred. We're scratching it with delusion. We're scratching it with judgment. We're scratching it with dissatisfaction. We're scratching it by taking personal the things people say. We're scratching it by holding on to gain and lamenting over loss and grasping at happiness and suffering over sorrow and you know and all of these 8 worldly winds that the Buddha talks about. And when he talks about the unconditioned, um, he's not making a metaphysical claim. When the Buddha talks about the unconditioned, he's not making a metaphysical claim that there's some other place, some other thing, some other mind, something apart from these 5 domains of experience that he calls the 5 aggregates. No, he's saying that the mind in its natural state, when it is not scratched up and poked and prodded and beaten by greed, hatred, and delusion, is perfectly peaceful, perfectly happy, perfectly healthy, and healed completely. The unconditioned is a completely healed mind, is what it is. And so a lot of the practice of the Dhamma is about stopping, right? It's about not scratching, essentially. You can think of all of the pressures of greed, hatred, and delusion as being like as a desire to scratch and itch. But if you just don't scratch and you just have enough, faith and confidence from what you've seen, if you've taken the time to put the mind down and let it heal even just a little bit, right? You've convinced yourself that it's okay to put it down. It's okay to stop shaking the mind. It's okay to stop stimulating the mind. It's okay to stop being dissatisfied. Just put it down, let it be, let it rest. And you watch what it does. Just the tiny bit of relief that you get, if that's the first time you've done it, will feel like one of the most profound experiences you've had. And then, of course, the mistake we make is thinking that that's that feeling of relief that we get from putting the mind down for just a second is some magical experience that we then need to go and seek, and we could spend even the rest of our lives seeking that little bit of relief we got. It feels like a lot because we've never done it before. We could spend the rest of our lives chasing after that feeling of relief, thinking like we had some mystical experience, but it's just a bit of relief because we're punishing ourselves. We're hurting ourselves. We're scratching at the mind, essentially. Just like Buddhadasa says, we're stabbing it, essentially. That's what's going on with greed, hatred, and delusion. One of the markers of stream entry is this realization that I'm doing this to myself. That Dhammarato talks about this, like as going from being a victim to being a winner. That's what he's talking about. The victim's attitude is that, oh, woe is me, the world sucks, my upbringing sucks, the mind that I have sucks. I was using myself as an example. I have ADHD, I can't focus. So hard to do Dhamma practice with a brain that's ADHD or whatever. all kinds of things, whatever external condition that you can blame for why like you're dissatisfied. That's the victim's attitude, right? That's the attitude of a putujana in the sutta language. The thickster is what that means. And I think I thought about that. Like, why does the Buddha call ordinary people thicksters? Why? Because we're so swollen with stupidity that we can't see what's right in front of us. That's the only thing I could think of. What's right in front of us is that things are the things are okay exactly as they are. We don't, like enlightenment's not the stain at the end of a rainbow. Liberation's not the stain at the end of a long path. It's right here in front of us through the door of seeing things in the right way, seeing things in the right way in terms of what the antidotes are, which is anicca, right? Seeing things as impermanent. The reason that impermanence is so healing is because it prevents the mind from grabbing on, and the mind is suffering from grabbing on, right? So it's like reality is this rope that's attached to an anchor on a speeding boat, so it's going really fast and we're grabbing onto that rope and we're getting this horrible rope burn. If we see that the rope is moving really fast, we won't grab onto it. That's the perception of impermanence is effectively. It goes much deeper than that. You got to bring impermanence deep into the heart. I won't get into all that right now, but if you bring impermanence, the deeper the perception of impermanence is, the more profound your experience of liberation will be. I'll just put it that way. It leads into the perception of the fact that all the things that we chase after are not going to satisfy it. You can't see anything as permanent. You can't see anything as satisfying. You can't see anything as ownable. When you can't see anything as permanent, satisfying, or ownable, the mind won't grasp and cling, and therefore it won't suffer. And then that's when the mind really starts to heal. This traditional idea of stream entry is when grasping and clinging really cease, but the mind still has some time to heal. It can take 7 lifetimes, apparently.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate you
I don't
sharing
know if
your
I answered
opinion
that last
on that.
question. Oops, sorry about that. So, yeah, anybody else can still add to that. I still haven't gotten to Santiago's question, but it is what it is. I'm sending a text message. Okay, I'm done with that.
I have a question, but I feel like it's a bit unrelated to what you guys just talk about.
Yeah, can I just check in with Santiago really quick just to see if any of what I said answered his question? Or if I should.
I'm learning a lot. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
I could go into it somewhat more specifically if you'd like.
Yeah, that would be great. I would really appreciate that.
Yeah. So just to make a long story short, Santiago, you were asking about not being moved by happiness or sorrow sounds like an emotionless state, even though you know that's not what it is. Well, the bliss of the Dhamma is desirelessness. It is, it's described, Nibbana has the characteristics of desirelessness, of emptiness, of signlessness, meaning that Nibbana has no, like the mind can't make an image out of Nibbana, essentially. That's what silencelessness is in a way. Like, when you see a stop sign with the words STOP, it signifies to cease moving, right? But if English isn't your language, then those words might not mean anything. But if you had a stop sign with a hand up, then that would be a more universal sign for stop, right? So a sign is something that signifies something else. So Nibbana doesn't have any point of reference in the domains of experience that we're used to. I won't get into that, but just one of the qualities of Nibbana is it's signless. There's no representation of it in the mind, you can say. It's meaningless, basically, which when you say meaningless, it sounds like a negative thing, but that's just because we live our life in a meaningful way. So meaninglessness sounds bad, but it's not. And then it's said to be aimless. Nibbana is said to be aimless. Because intention, sankharas, come to cessation, and Nibbana is said to be desireless. So the reason that this sounds like an unpleasant experience, in fact, when the Buddha used to talk about Nibbana to some people from traditions that maybe weren't as adept in restraint and asceticism as some of his other people, some people would pull their hair out, beat their chest, they'd become terrified, people committed suicide. Nibbana sounded awful, it didn't sound great. And that's because the condition of human life is our desire is everything to us. We are what we want. It's what creates all of our sense of meaning. It's what creates all of our sense of self. In a very technical way, independent origination, desire literally is what fabricates the entire world, the entire sense of self, and the entire relationship between the world and the sense of self. So we really live in and as our desires, and that's why it's called dying before you die, essentially, because the structure that we take to be who and what we are is fabricated by desire. And so the reason that the Buddha chose to focus on dukkha as the phenomena, because really what the Buddha was seeking was liberation, right? And he found that there wasn't a philosophical system that he could teach that would make people liberated, or a metaphysical teaching, because no matter what philosophy or metaphysics you deliver, it's going to become a concept in the mind, and that concept in the mind will become something that we then desire, right? So, your highest concept of the broadest possible context, I like to call it, can be God. The broadest possible context you can have in mind can be the whole of nature. The broadest possible context you have in mind can be the universe. It can be the Atman in Vedanta, right? Atman and Brahma being one, which those are very broad contexts, and you can become almost like 99.9% liberated if you give everything to God, or if you realize the union of Atman and Brahma, if you give everything back to nature. But as long as there is a concept, there is a boundary, right? It's sort of like I told Ivan once, like, people get under your skin because your skin is somewhere, right? Like, where is the boundary of yourself? That's where your skin is. I like to use the example of angry neighbors in the US who don't like people parking in front of their houses, because their sense of self goes all the way down to the street. You park in front of their house, they're like, why are you parking in front of my house? Like, that's where your boundary of self is, or your views,
Michael,
your
can I
political
add
party.
something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Really quick, I just wanted to say,
No,
if
take your
we're
time.
not, I was just going to say with the emotions, it's not void of emotions. It's not void of thoughts, feelings, or emotions, or else you'd just be a dead rock.
Mhm.
It's void of the attachments that cause dukkha to these thoughts, feelings, and emotions.
Mhm. Yes, exactly. The assumption of them, right? The taking them up as me and mine, the attachment, the clinging. Because the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, these belong to the aggregates, right? So they belong to nature. And the not taking them personally prevents the suffering from arising. But essentially the point that I was getting to about desirelessness is that we're deluded by desire. Desire is actually is a negative thing, right? It's painful. Desire is painful. We don't see that desire is painful. That's part of our delusion. It's precisely because desire is painful that it drives our entire life, right? Hunger is a painful feeling that drives us to eat. Loneliness is a painful feeling and that drives us to seek the company of others. Fear is a painful feeling that drives us to, do a whole lot of things. Belief systems, hatred of people with different beliefs, whatever. There's, these are all like, what is it called? The reproductive instinct, I like to say, being horny. That is a painful feeling that drives us to seek, sexual gratification or whatever. Every form, desire in every form is painful. It's deeply painful, and everything we do is to relieve that pain. And what the pleasure that we get from fulfilling our desires is not coming from getting the object. It's from that very, very small moment of relief from the desire itself that we take to be satisfying. And that tiny little moment of desirelessness, we spend our whole lives chasing after it, right? But then we get like an emotional hangover, especially for the big desires, like Olympic athletes. When they win gold, they go into a depression almost right afterwards because they've spent their whole life thinking, this is what I want, this is who I am. And then they win the gold and and then in the next moment, it's like, what the fuck? What do I do next? Kind of, who am I now? Because they built their entire sense of self on that pursuit. We do it in small ways, but this is just a big example. You might have spent your whole life thinking if you become a pilot, and then you become a pilot and, all of a sudden, like, the satisfaction you thought you were going to get wasn't there. But so just to keep it brief, it's desirelessness that we actually enjoy. And the training in the Dhamma is about recognizing desirelessness when it's there. That's that third noble truth, the cessation of desire, the cessation of suffering that depends on desire. It's recognizing desirelessness and training the mind to take refuge there. That's the only safe refuge, because it's the only place where the mind can become imperturbable, like Dhammarato says. And Buddhadasa spends like 99% of the time he does his calls focusing on just this one point, and when you're completely satisfied, basically free of desire, then, like, questions don't matter, attainments don't matter, labels don't matter, what's next doesn't matter, what came before doesn't matter, who am I, it doesn't matter. Just anything that you can pick up and say, oh, this is important, I want to know about this, it just ceases to have any meaning, right? It becomes signless when desire is absent. And that is the Buddha, what the Buddha called, like, the highest happiness, essentially, that the state of complete satisfaction, of being completely free of desire. So, like Dhammadasa was also pointing out, like, I wouldn't say it's empty of emotion. It's just that whatever emotion is there is a wholesome emotion. It's not, and a wholesome emotion is one that doesn't create dissatisfaction. You can say a wholesome thought is a thought that doesn't create dissatisfaction. But it's not like the thoughts and the feelings are so different. It's that the you who reacted to things as good or bad is sort of not there to make a big deal out of, to make things good or bad, to experience things as suffering or as happiness or sorrow or happiness. Things are just what they are, and when things are just allowed to be what they are, there's just this very peaceful coolness in the heart and the mind, which is that state of stopping and allowing the mind to heal, as I mentioned before. So I said the Dhamma really is about healing. It's about just putting everything down, being satisfied without, and allowing the mind to heal, and then remembering to just keep putting it down, keep letting the mind heal, And everything else is just to that end. The perception of anicca is just to convince the mind to put everything down so that the heart can heal, essentially. Perception of dukkha, perception of anatta, that's just there to convince the mind to stop grasping and clinging so that it can set itself down and allow itself time to heal.
Could I give my explanation just before we move on to the next topic? Or
Yeah.
I agree with what Dhammarato did and what you said, Michael. But the way I like to explain it, through meditation, I've had states where I'm not moved by happiness or sadness, and it's sort of like you don't see it as you who's sad. It's sort of like you're just seeing the sadness, and it's more like a beautiful work of art. Like it's not like you're not feeling the emotion, you're completely feeling it, and it's like a completely different experience because it's like much more clear, and it's like looking at a masterpiece painting. It's just like you see it for what it is, as being like absolute perfection. So it's that's sort of how I put it into words.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Thank you very much for answering my question.
I have a quick question on this topic before we move on. It's okay. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, yes. So this desirelessness, it's so amazing. Like, but to me, it seems like this desirelessness can only happen in the now. Like, you're having can't be happy. Is it without doubt? Because a lot of times you have doubt about the future, and that can consume you. But it's not. I mean, it's part of the desires, I guess. But to me, it's like, is this something different to have doubts about this whole thing that would prevent you, or maybe not even what Buddha says? Just you have doubts about something happening in the future. Of course, you start thinking about the future. That's already you're kind of getting lost there already. But does Buddha talk about doubt at all in connection to this desirelessness?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, I didn't know. I didn't look very much, but I never heard anybody say, so I was wondering.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I have things to say about that, but I wouldn't. I want to allow anybody else who wants to respond some time as well. At first, I was looking at Mikey just because anytime a question about time or the future or the present moment comes up, he's always got the right thing to say.
Okay.
I feel like, but yeah, it's up to you, Mikey, if you want to respond to that at all.
I'll put that in my notes. Mikey for doubt.
He is the Tao now.
Yeah, doubt. There's different ways to reframe it, right?
Yeah.
So as Michael had just pointed out, yeah, especially when we're talking about the future or the past, those things don't exist.
Yeah.
So any thoughts that we have of them are completely conceptual. And what does that mean? They're made up. We could even look at these conceptual thoughts and say, well, yeah, maybe there's some accuracy to them, right? You're able to guess who's going to win gold at the next Olympic event. So you think, oh, that conceptual thought that I have of the future was right. It was true. But
I
it's
have
worthwhile
powers now.
to recognize that you still made it up.
Yeah.
And so in that moment that you made it up, there was no truth there. And the idea of getting away from doubt, throwing the doubt out, putting it far away from us, this is, about getting back into the present moment, into the here now. Because even the here now is conceptual. What you're experiencing with the senses is, in a way, still perceptions of reality. This is hot, this is cold, this smells good, this is stinky, right? These are still conceptual in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, are you getting into it? Are you trying to put you inside of it? So, like, when you feel pain or a painful thought, or have something stabbing you in some sort of way, if the thought arises, this is me, this is mine, this is my experience, then that's when the actual suffering occurs.
Yeah.
But
So
if we
subtle.
don't, the same thing is true even with happy thoughts, with happy feelings. When we fall into it and we have the thought of, oh, I am happy, I am experiencing pleasantness, then there's an attachment there. And so once that happiness goes away, we see it as, oh, we lost a part of ourselves. And then there's grief. But we can just skip that entirely. So whenever something happy arises, such as like a happy thought or a happy feeling, we don't have to get into it. We don't have to fall into it like a trap. We can just see that it arises and go, oh, that's a happy thought. That's a happy feeling. Nice to see you.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing with the pain as well. It's a painful thought. It's a painful feeling. Don't need to attach to it. Don't need to attach it to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so doubt basically is just another form of attachment.
Mm.
Mm.
That's good.
Yeah, it's attaching to the future, or it's attaching to the past. Oh, I'm not sure I did the right thing in the past. With the future, it's thinking, oh, I'm worried I might make the wrong decision in the future.
Yeah.
Do you see how we're falling into this concept? Because even the feelings and the thoughts that we're having right now are still in their own way made up concepts. Because we can't hold on to them. We can't keep them. They're not ours. They're passing away. They're effervescent.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, don't try to grab on a hold to them. I love that analogy Michael made earlier of the hands grabbing onto the rope.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mikey. I'm glad I punted that to you because that was just the perfect answer. And conventionally, when Mikey's talking about is what emptiness is in early Buddhism. The absence of what's not there, what's not here, the past, the future, the conceptualizations of the present. But the reason that they're not here is exactly what Mikey is saying, is the absence of upadana, of putting ourselves into these arisings, these sankharas, these concepts. And when the mind broadens to the point of where I really feel you're coming from, Mikey. Honestly, that's a very broad mind you're speaking from. And Ajahn Chah has a simile. He says, if you pour a spoonful of salt in a cup of water, the water will become salty. But if you pour a spoonful of salt into a big fresh lake, the lake's not going to become salty. So if the mind is identified with thoughts, feelings, emotions, it's like that cup of water. When dukkha arises, the mind becomes dukkha. It's becomes salty in both senses of the word. But when the mind is broad and big, then you see it the way Mikey's describing. It's just, oh, there's a thought. That thought might have been your entire universe in the past. It might have been the entire universe in the past. An emotion may arise that used to be the entire world, right? A memory, a thought of the future, whatever it may be. But when the mind broadens in the way that Mikey's describing, and there's different ways the mind broadens in the suttas through this entry into emptiness, but through the Brahma Viharas as well, right? It's considering developing a broad mind. Non-ill will is the path of the Brahma Viharas. So metta is universal non-ill will. Karuna is non-ill will towards those who suffer. Normally when we see someone suffering, we feel scared, we feel pity, we feel disgust. But having non-ill will towards those who are suffering, the mind won't collapse into those emotions. Mudita is non-ill will towards those who are happy and successful. Normally, when the mind is small, when someone is happy and successful, we feel jealous, we feel envious, we feel competitive because the mind is collapsed, it becomes small. But the broad mind of metta does not collapse and become small, right? It stays very broad. And then, of course, the upekkha is the mind that sees in the way that Mikey's describing, that these are all just appearances and experience, and oh, there they are, there it is. It's sort of like, instead of the mind being a cloud, the mind is the atmosphere itself, right? The cloud is a modulation, it's a modification of the entire atmosphere. And it's sort of like, you can imagine, if your mind is the atmosphere, that when you get lost in a thought, a feeling, or emotion, you become identified with it because of upadana. You become the cloud, and then as the cloud changes and degrades, you change and degrade, and as the cloud evaporates, you evaporate. But if the mind is the atmosphere itself, then the appearance of a cloud is just the appearance of a cloud. The disappearance of a cloud is just the disappearance of the cloud. The atmosphere remains unbothered. Just to go back to what Santiago was talking about, that unbothered mind just sees the appearance and disappearance of clouds within itself. Rivers, oceans, rain, these are just particularizations of the broader context that we call the water cycle, right? So these are just different analogies for how the mind can become broad, so broad that whatever appears and disappears within it is not taken personally, and instead it's just, oh, there it is, oh, there it goes. Not, oh wow, here, it's, the drama is gone essentially. And the mistake that's usually made when things like this are said is we conceptualize the broad mind. It's not a concept. It's not an object. It's not a thing. It's not someplace else. It's not something else. It's not someone else. It's not something apart from experience. It's the same experience, non-objectified, you can say. That's essentially one way you can understand emptiness or metta or jhana, right? They're just different sort of avenues to this broadest possible context. I like to think of it as, but that can become a concept. Think of it as the atmosphere. I like that analogy. Make your mind like the atmosphere, not like the cloud.
Fantastic. Thank you.
seeing everything as made up. It's just another way to talk about non-delusion, you know. Thinking that it's not made up is delusion. Thinking that it's real is delusion. Thinking that it's permanent, thinking that it's satisfying, thinking that it's real, you know. So Mikey's talking about non-delusion. When you see that the past is made up, the future is made up. Even if the shot in the dark lands on target every once in a while, that doesn't mean that the shot was real or whatever, or that the target was there. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, and that's a good analogy you had, because at some point we have to pull the trigger. And even in the Sangha with these classes, it's like if we want to become good marksmen with guns or arrows, these are the classes, the Sangha, that supports and gets us motivated to go out there on the range. But don't mistake the talking about the practice, talking about the shooting for the practice itself. It's part of the practice. But the best practice is to get your gun, get your arrow, and you have to put in a little bit of time and go on the range and shoot. And that's gladdening the mind here and now. When you're away from us, away from talking about shooting at the target, when you're out there on the range, breathing in, relaxing, letting go. And then the fruits of that practice, of that finger, is the peace that I like to say is our true nature. And that's the emphasis, is the practice.
Exactly, yeah. It's when Dhammarato is talking about gladdening the mind, right? The Buddha says the happy mind is easily samadhied. The happy mind is easily gathered together, because the Buddha speaks of everything in terms of causal connections. So he'll say the happy mind is easily concentrated, or the happy mind is easily unified. The unified mind easily sees things as they really are, gains knowledge and vision of things as they are. When the mind sees things as they really are, it gains disenchantment, dispassion. When the mind develops dispassion, the cessation of wanting, then it gains release, or cessation of clinging, right? That's becoming the cloud instead of the atmosphere. And then it gains knowledge and vision of release. So the purpose of gladdening the mind is to get to the mind, as Buddhadasa called it, the mind fit for work. It's not necessarily the end, right? Gladdening the mind is not necessarily the end. It's the training that makes the mind fit for work, and the work is to see things as they are, to see things. That's why, when we just kind of talk about things are okay as they are, there's resistance, because the mind in its normal state doesn't see that. And it's not necessarily true. It's true in the ultimate sense, but it's not true in the particular context of the mind as it may be in your situation. But when you gladden the mind, as Dhammarato pointed out, as the practice, when you continuously gladden the mind, it makes the mind capable of seeing things as they really are. So, clearing up that delusion, releasing identification with the cloud, allowing the mind to be the atmosphere. But that's a good reminder that Dhammarato pointed out, is focusing on the practice, on the training, and not getting too attached to the end, because then that can create confusion, that can create more dissatisfaction, that can make us want to skip the training. So gladdening the mind here and now, that was a good reminder.
And also, would you consider like the cloud is part of the atmosphere, but if something happens to the cloud, it doesn't harm the atmosphere?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, I would agree.
I want to ask about Bhikkhu Buddhadasa on his book Happiness and Hunger. Really love that book. he mentioned something about the idea of best is always, I'm paraphrasing here, but dangerous because it invites the mind to seek. So if there's always something better, so your mind will just be the forerunner in chasing, and restlessness will arise if one is not mindful. I often think about, is it contradicting in the sense that in the practice in itself, for me, I think it is really skillful and wholesome that I ask myself, how can I be, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it's like more satisfied. I mean, in a sense that is my mind conceptualizing something right now? Is my mind not really in the present right now? Is my breath not deep enough? Like question like this really helps. So isn't that in itself, I try to seek the best, like seek.
Yeah, I mean, Ivan, I feel like you know the answers to these questions as you ask them, but the word seek, how can I be more happy? That's still trying to use dissatisfaction to become satisfied, right? Seeking means, something's missing, nothing's missing, you know. You brought up the book Happiness and Hunger. I believe it's a transcription of one of my favorite talks from Ajahn Buddhadasa of the same title. But my favorite quote, and I always bring this up because the Buddhadasa spoke about the Noble Dhamma. That's where Dhammarato learned the Noble Dhamma from Buddhadasa. Is one of his closest, friends is Ajahn Po, and being in Swanmuk with them is this is maybe a conversation with myself, because I'm always trying to, well, not really so much recently, but talking to people who are a little bit more like my past self, stuck in the suttas. Although the suttas are wonderful, they can be used in the wrong way. Like, oh, but there's this practice and this gradual practice of awakening, which it is gradual, but Buddhadasa cuts right through all of that in the same way that Dhammarato talks about cutting through the Gordian knot, right? Everybody was trying to untie that knot, right? They couldn't figure out how to untie it. Then here comes Gordian. It's an old Greek myth, I think, or maybe a Roman myth, but he just cut right through with a sword. And that's what satisfaction's about. But what Buddhadasa said in that talk or in that book is, when you hear about the good, you hunger for the good. When you hear about the better, you hunger for the better. When you hear about the best, you hunger for the best. And you can even hunger for the better than the best. But what the Buddha taught is no hunger.
This is funny because I think I get you, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know. I think maybe this is something.
Well, the way it works, Ivan, is you're in a relationship with someone who's toxic and bad for you. And we're all here telling you that this person is bad for you. And you know it, but you're not convinced just yet. You need to see something concrete. You need to see that this person is like cheating on you, possibly. You need to see it for yourself. Maybe we've told you they're cheating on you. I'm just using you as an example here, of the mind that hasn't yet given up its relationship to hunger, essentially. I've used the analogy before, maybe in a different context, but the depth of seeing that's called seeing the Four Noble Truths, the depths of that seeing, because they seem so plain on the surface, but when the Four Noble Truths are really seen, it's as impactful emotionally as if you found out that your parents weren't really your parents. They had actually murdered your real parents and kidnapped you as a baby and raised you as their own. That's how impactful it is to see the Four Noble Truths. Because who are our parents? Buddha said that They are ignorance and craving. Ignorance and craving are the ones who have raised us up, given us our entire sense of self, given us our entire sense of what the world is, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, what's good, what's bad, everything. We are swimming in it. Just like fish don't know water is wet, and frogs do, we don't know that we're swimming in ignorance and craving until we've stepped outside of it fully. It's like, maybe you've floated on the surface of the water, but you haven't really become dry yet. So you don't really know the nature of water until you've become fully dry. That's kind of what it's like. But going back to the relationship metaphor, you're not going to give up your passion for that person fully because your passion is deluding you into thinking that they're trustworthy, that they're good for you, that they're beautiful, they're honest, no matter what anybody tells you. But if you truly see them as they are, you find out that they actually collect cats off the street and cut their heads off and make flutes out of their souls, like in Haruki Murakami's Kafka on the Shore. You're like, oh my God. Or they're Jeffrey Dahmer. Let's say you were in love with Jeffrey Dahmer and he seemed like a really nice guy and you loved him and he looks really handsome and, he's charming and, he's good to you. He buys you gifts and he treats you really well and he tells you nice things. And then you come home and you catch him mid-eating somebody's arm, and then at that moment you experience this passion because you've seen Jeffrey Dahmer as he really is. That's
Talk is getting really interesting.
Can I provide
more metaphors that you?
Can I provide an example? Because so what if in the context of when it comes to practicing meditation, I'm aware that at certain place and certain time it will be more relatively quiet. Therefore, that is the best time I will practice. And it really helped me. But is that in itself feeding the part of me that, I think that's basically what I'm trying to get into. Isn't the discerning part important?
Yeah, it's okay. So, sorry about a million analogies here, but like if you were a drug addict, then knowing that you need to go to rehab is a good thing to know. You know what I mean? Meditation can be thought as like a detox for the mind, as the quiet, secluded practice. You need to go and detox and let the mind become sober in order to see things more clearly, in order to become dispassionate towards the drug of choice. So knowing that, knowing that your mind is not in a wholesome condition, that's not a bad thing to know. That's a wise thing to know. And knowing that you need to create secluded practices where you can allow the mind to detox and sober up, essentially. That's because it sounds like you're asking about meditation, like structured or formal sits, something like that. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, yes. It sometimes even extend more to formal sit, as in just trying to be aware if the is clicking onto something. So sometimes I think I just hit the blind spot. I'm not sure. I'm just gonna speak this out loud. I think that me thinking about am I being neurotic about whether am I seeking for the best in itself, that's the part that's unwholesome. Because because I don't know if I'm lying to myself. If I'm paying attention, I don't think there's any unwholesomeness in it. I'm just trying to make sure that.
It sounds like analysis paralysis.
Even just making sure in itself that's unwholesome. Because
maybe just distance. Maybe try distancing. You know what I mean? Like listen to the way Mikey talks about thoughts, feelings, emotions, past and future. You can just see how far they are from his experience. He sees them; they're way over there. They're not. He's not them. Like all of this thinking about what is wholesome and unwholesome, and this neuroses that you're talking about, you're too inside of everything. So try to see if you can create some distance between where your point of view is, where your sense of self is. It's another thing about that change of lineage that the Buddha teaches is the self becomes secondary to experience, not primary. Our way of experience in the world is like as like an I'm experiencing the world, and that's sort of like dislocated in a way, where I, me, mine are also thoughts, feelings, and images arising in experience rather than like receivers of experience. But anyway, so that's sort of what that analogy of the atmosphere and the cloud is about. Broadening the mind to the point where these thoughts you're talking about are just clouds in the atmosphere rather than like you're inside of them. But the means to doing that is non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, because it's greed, hatred, and delusion that shrinks the mind into these phenomena. So non-greed is letting go of wanting things that you don't have, right? That dissatisfaction. Non-hatred is, and I've heard you talk about this too, is letting go of irritation, judgment, disliking of whatever it may be. So I've heard you talk about being irritated with other people's approach to the practice, or not doing it right, or having trouble just whatever it may be, right? Any kind of irritation or ill will. Instead, starting with that universal non-ill will, just being, just understanding that everything arises within a context of conditions. These aren't people doing things. These aren't people doing things to people or things happening to me. These are, conditions arising within specific contexts. When the conditions are right for something to arise, it arises, right? So that's seeing things through, that noble right view, dependent origination. That helps you to achieve that non-ill will if you can see it that way. Because it depersonalizes it, right? So take that personalization, that emotionalization out of that perception. Then the non-delusion is not seeing what is impermanent as permanent. A thought can feel permanent. A feeling can feel permanent. A perception can feel permanent. A judgment can feel permanent. You can look at your mom and think that she is this way. You have this fixed view of who she is, right? And maybe she's been that way your whole life, and maybe she'll be that way until she passes away. But that doesn't mean that it's permanent. So anyway, so not seeing things that are impermanent as permanent, seeing things as impermanent, seeing things as unsatisfying, right? Because we're unconsciously deluded in this way, right? You may have the idea of the perfect situation for your practice, right? That idea of that perfect circumstance for your practice is a permanent, satisfying, controllable image in your mind. And that whole image is delusion. There's no permanent, satisfying, controllable circumstance. Circumstances are conditions, and conditions are impermanent, unsatisfying, and empty of self. So that's putting things into the proper context when you see them that way. And, it always comes down to whatever doubt you have, whatever restlessness there is, whatever it is that you want or don't want. These are just different forms of craving, shape-shifting itself to keep the mind off balance, to keep the mind wanting something it doesn't have. You can see that for what it is, let go of the not wanting, be satisfied with the way things are, and keep returning to being satisfied, bringing the mind back to being settled within itself. The last couple things the Buddha said before he died, right? One of the things he said is for, I can't remember the exact quote, but he said, be an island unto yourself. Monks, be an island unto yourself. Take yourself as refuge. He's using the word self there in a broader sense of the undivided mind, essentially, because the mind divides itself and it particularizes itself, and these particularizations are what we see as not self. But when the mind kind of comes and settles into its own self, its own being, then it's undivided. That's satisfaction, right? The mind kind of settles into itself. I'm kind of being careful here because I feel like some of these words can be misunderstood, but it's letting go of those doubts, letting go of those wanting what you don't have, letting go of the being irritated, and allowing things to just kind of settle. And like I said, allowing yourself to heal. Allowing the mind to heal instead of being stuck in this cycle of dissatisfaction. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I have something to say about this. I've been thinking about this topic a lot, and it seems, and I've been practicing, and it seems like doubt can have a net positive on the removal of dukkha. Like, for example, if you think to yourself, is it possible for me to completely love every aspect of reality? Then that sort of little bit of doubt when you're asking a question is getting you to get into the present moment and actually take a look. And then if you can answer yes, oh yeah, now that I've actually taken a look, yeah, I can actually love every aspect of reality. That sort of seems like it might be like, it might not actually do this. Maybe it's a blind spot I have, but it seems like you've taken a step forward and you removed a lot of dukkha because you've actually taken a look and seen, you used that to do it, but you've like taken a step back, added some dukkha, but then once you've taken a look, you can see, oh wow, I didn't need to actually have all this dukkha. I can see now that I can love everything as it is. So it is counterintuitive where we're like, oh no, we don't want any dukkha, don't have any doubt, or like we don't need any doubt, but it seems like it can actually benefit you. And that's been my experience when I've been practicing, like going for walks and stuff. So it's kind of counterintuitive how things work with in my experience.
So I'd like to point to something Alexander Hippel put in the chat, which is doubt can have the quality of wanting to know. And with what you're talking about, Jordan, that's very much related. So a good example would be the question that a lot of people tend to have, which is, am I worthy of love? Can I be loved? Is there someone out there for me, right? And there's many people that will then follow that question and go on this journey to find out the answer. And, so they'll go on dates or download some dating apps, maybe even get married to somebody. And, they get all the way to the wedding and they've said their vows and they said, I do. And they finally answered the question. They've realized, oh, yes, I can be loved. There is someone out there for me. I am worthy. And again, as Michael was pointing to earlier in the call, there actually is relief from dissatisfaction right then and there, right? But it's not because that they got married. It's not because they got what they want. It's because they were finally able, after all of that, to set the question down. And what the Buddha taught and what we're saying here is practice throwing the questions out right now. We can skip this journey. We can skip all of these different steps, because if we get into the habit of having to take a prior step to what the Buddha is teaching, what the Buddha is telling us, then we're just filling filling our day and filling our life with all of these unnecessary steps when we can just be satisfied right now, right here, and just enjoy life? Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that could be a danger if you hold the doubt for like multiple days or
The thing
like
is,
hours. But yeah,
the thing is you don't have to hold the doubt at all. Is that you can you can see when you've grabbed the doubt and throw it out. You can let go of
Yes.
it. There doesn't need to be this, okay, well, let me pick it up first, right? Dhammarato uses the analogy of like, do you need to pick up the shit to know that it's shit? Or can you see it from a distance? Can you just smell it, get a whiff of it, and know, oh, I don't need that? That's unnecessary. Because what you're talking about is actually the way that people are always living their lives, is they are always having this practice of, let me give in to the doubt just a little bit.
Yep.
All I need to know that somebody will love me is if I just get one match on Tinder, and then I'll know that I'm good enough. And then they've gotten the one match and they still don't feel good enough, so they say, well, all I need to know that someone can love me is if I go on a date and the girl smiles or the boy smiles. And then they do that, and that still isn't good enough. Right? So throw your questions out, because the questions of, is this good enough? That is what is keeping you from seeing. That is what is keeping you from knowing this sort of quote unquote deeper knowledge that things are okay right now. Because if you don't have to question it, if you don't have to doubt it, then there's the knowing right there. Is that, oh yes, things are okay right now. When you don't have any questions about it, when you don't have any doubts about it. But playing this game of let me feed the doubt just a little bit, it's a dangerous game because, again, like I said, it's a game we're already playing. And there's really no need for it at all, when instead we can practice the game of starving off the doubts and realizing that when the doubts die, I don't die. There is no me in the doubt to begin with. And in a way, this is what it means to go into the realm of the deathless, is to see that when our thoughts, our feelings, our desires, when they pass away, everything's still okay. Everything's still all right.
I have a quick question. Is it possible there can be skillful doubts, right? Borrowing back what Michael said about toxic relationship. I really love this example. So what if it's a skillful doubt saying, is my partner actually abusive? Isn't that actually a good way of first stepping into the stream of life? I don't know.
Just breathe and relax. Here and now. Just breathe and relax.
Yeah, thank you,
It's okay if
Dhammarato.
you don't know. It's okay if you don't know the answers to your questions. There's nothing to figure out. It's not a puzzle. It's breathing, the practice of breathing and relaxing. Doesn't that feel good? And congratulate yourself. That's all it is. That's all it ever will be. That's all the Buddha did. I'm sure Mikey at his Wat with Dhammarato, he breathes, he relaxes, he takes care of his responsibilities. And for the other Mike, it's the same thing. I'm sure he breathes and relaxes and takes care of his responsibilities. And for the Buddha, it was the same. He breathed, he relaxed, he chilled out, took care of some responsibilities. That's all it is. That's all it ever will be. Making it more mystical, like Mikey was saying, deeper, finding deeper meaning. It's just relaxing and breathing. Everything else is a hindrance. Everything else is an illusion, like Mikey was saying earlier. Just breathing and relax. That's the practice. And the fruits of that practice are just peace emptiness. A whole bunch of words couldn't describe it. But it's
if I
just
could just,
basically peace.
I was just thinking about your
The Dhamma is called the deathless, it's called the timeless. And the very profound thing that Mikey said, is when he said, and that's where the deathless is found, because when the doubt dies, the knowing is still there. You don't die with it. I mean, I can't really say it better than you said it, Mikey, to be honest. I thought it was really well articulated. But it's just like when you're, those optical illusions, and then you can't see them, and then when you can see them, like the Dalmatian with all that there's like an illusion with a bunch of blotches of black, and it just looks like a bunch of blotches of black, and then all of a sudden you adjust your vision a little bit, and you can see there's a Dalmatian drinking from a puddle of water. You know what I'm talking about? I can't remember what those are called.
Mm.
That's how simple and profound the shift in perspective is, when suddenly the mind isn't dragged into all of these questions and all these different forms of dissatisfaction. What was coming to mind while Mikey was talking is, like, you have to have that absolute conviction, that devotion to reality, to being okay with things as they are, that he's demonstrating, because one tiny little sip of craving, it just snowballs, and it could snowball for minutes, hours, months, years, into your entire life, endless eons, endless expansions and contractions of the universe, right? Tiny little sip, I have this writer who I've always loved. His name is Jim Harrison, and he was, like, they call him American Zen, but he was a heavy drinker. And he wrote this piece of nonfiction once about how to drink, which, by the way, disclaimer, don't drink at all. But he was talking about how drinking begets drinking. If you're an alcoholic, one sip of alcohol, or even a smell of it, and then the next day you wake up, naked, face down in the gutter or whatever. That's the same thing with craving. It's exactly like that. You give into one tiny little doubt, one tiny little drop of dissatisfaction, and the mind dives into this state of intoxication again. It could become completely confused and blacked out. And what we're trying to do here is just, like, is step directly into reality, over and over and over and over again, until it really becomes clear, that that's all you need to do, that you just need to be happily present with reality as it is, without needing to add anything to it, alter it in any way. What's left is just the fullness of experience. Nothing is missing from this experience, right? It's full and complete exactly as it is. Nothing needs to be added to it. Anything you add to it just dilutes it. And you just stay with it. Don't give in to any version of dissatisfaction that the mind creates. Like Mikey said, that's what we've been doing our whole lives. This is a major change to the way that everybody lives their life.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I appreciate your comments. I understand it, I think, a lot better. Like, and yeah, I appreciate what you guys said.
I just noticed Dhammarato is right. I'm breathing. And
Don't
relaxing.
stop. Good.
Actually, the truth is, I'm not breathing. It's just the breath is happening all on its own. Anyway,
I do want to point out one thing, and that is, Ivan had brought up the point of, if you're in a toxic relationship, is it okay to ask, am I in a toxic relationship? And the thing there with this sort of thing is look at what's going on and you'll know whether or not you're in a toxic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if you're experiencing reality, if you're in reality and you know what's happening, you don't have to ask this question of like, wait, is this real? It's just get into the practice of being in reality, and then you'll just know. And then not only will you know, it'll be a lot easier to know what the wise thing is to do in that situation, whether it's a toxic relationship or not.
The thing I've noticed with a lot of toxic
So Mikey,
relationships.
you just reminded me of one of my favorite one-liners in the suttas. It's in the Unbinding Sutta. It's an exclamation the Buddha made within those days of bliss post-awakening. They said, like, he spent 7 weeks enjoying the bliss of freedom before he did anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he uttered aloud was, all doubts vanish when he discerns a phenomena with its cause. Which sounds cryptic, but that's exactly what Mikey's talking about. You don't have to question reality. You just have to look at it. You just got to look at it, what's going on right in front of you. And then you won't doubt it. I'm not gonna ask, is there a glass of water in my hand? I can tell. Anyway, that's what the
Andrew,
Buddha's
you had
talking
something to say, Andrew?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Michael could hear you because I heard you speaking earlier. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say on the subject of the toxic relationships, what I've noticed with a lot of toxic relationships is the thing that sort of prevents the people from making the leap to leave the toxic relationship is that it's like a security issue. A
I
lot
don't
of
know
the
if you
time.
hear anything, but I'm not hearing anything.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's just
I hear
something
it.
on your end. Something on your
Oh,
end,
really?
Mike.
I'm just talking into my
You guys can hear him?
mic. I'm just talking to the mic on my phone.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
we can hear you, Andrew. For some reason, Michael can't.
I think
Oh.
what it might be is that I think one side of my speaker on the bottom of my iPhone has two sets of speakers. Only one of them works, so maybe his voice was coming through the one that doesn't work.
Zero. Okay. No, I was just going to say
So
that.
maybe somebody can repeat it and see what we do with it.
Yeah, I'll just be brief then.
I'll let you know when he's finished. Go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just thought I was just thinking that, yeah, one of the big factors for people, being able to leave the toxic relationship, is it's a matter of security for them. Like, I'm sort of thinking in terms of like domestic violence and stuff. Like when there's a woman who's involved with a man who she might be able to see all the bad things that he's doing, and she might realize it's a toxic relationship, but may not be able to leave it due to not being confident that she'll be able to support herself, or they might have kids or whatever. So I was just wanted to state that how important it is to be able to have some sort of like some sort of refuge within yourself, or like the confidence, I guess, to be able to develop that confidence within yourself before you can actually make that leap, because it can be quite scary to make a big leap, which is to say, all right, I'm happy with everything right now. You need to actually feel like that you're happy right now. That's part of the part of it is being able to develop that gladdening of the mind, and so that you have the confidence. Yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah, very well put, Andrew. Michael, he was basically talking about coming back to the refuge within. And yeah, I'm so happy that you put that there and reframed it into the idea of a toxic relationship. Because, I mean, again, we're just pointing at the same thing, the same practice over and over again. Dukkha, dukkha nirodha. How do you get out of the dukkha? By going within. Buddhadasa would repeat all the time, inside, inside.
Mhm.
Even you can even hear him say it in English sometimes. You know, he didn't speak much English, but he would say the word inside.
Mhm.
We have a lot of people have a toxic relationship with their mind, with
Mhm.
Mara. So the same rules apply, whether it's a physical person or your own mind. You don't want to get caught up in the weeds, you know? It causes
Mhm.
nothing but dissatisfaction.
Well said, Dhammadasa. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording here now. Feel free to continue hanging out, folks. This has been a really pleasant talk. Thank you, Michael, for hosting.
Thank you very much.